All right, so are you ready to go deep on climate change today?
Always ready to dive in.
Yeah,
But wow, you weren't kidding about a mixed bag of sources.
right? It's a lot.
Yeah.
They've got that BBC News article on COP29 and how the world's doing, which honestly feels a little all over the place. Then we've got some info on ecology, what they're doing with businesses, which is pretty cool. And of course, the deep dive on tipping points from earth.org. That one's a little scary.
Definitely some heavy stuff, but important to look at it all, I think.
Absolutely. By the end of this, we should have a much clearer idea of where we stand, what's working, what's not, and what it all means for, the average person.
I think a good place to start is with that global picture you mentioned. Like, what's the overall vibe coming out of COP29?
Yeah, well, the BBC article, COP29, How is the World Doing on Tackling Climate Change, kind of sums it up. It's like we're living in this crazy paradox where it's the hottest year on record ever, and yet fossil fuel use is still going up.
Yeah, that's the headline that really grabbed me too. It just seems so counterintuitive. Like, are we hitting the gas while slamming on the brakes?
Exactly. And the article goes on to explain that new fossil fuel projects are still being approved despite all the warnings from the UN about exceeding that 1.5 C warming target. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And, the article points out that China is a major player in this continued fossil fuel expansion. But it's important to remember they aren't the only ones.
Right. It's a global issue.
Yeah.
We can't just point fingers at one country. But on a more positive note, the BBC article also talks about the massive growth in renewables, especially solar and wind. I mean, that's got to be good news, right?
Absolutely. It's a huge bright spot. The fact that renewables are becoming increasingly cost competitive is a game changer.
And it's not just about cost. The UK closing down its last coal power station shows that transitioning away from fossil fuels is actually doable on a large scale.
Exactly. It's a concrete example of what's possible.
Hmm.
And the BBC article highlights how the economics of renewables are making them more and more appealing. So it's a win-win situation.
Right. It's not just about saving the planet. It's about making smart economic choices too, which I think is a really important point to emphasize.
Absolutely. It reframes the whole conversation about climate action.
Mhm.
It's not about sacrifice. It's about opportunity.
Okay, so we've got this big picture view. Now let's zoom in a bit. The BBC article also dives into electric vehicles and deforestation, which I think are worth exploring in more detail.
Definitely. Those are two key areas where we're seeing a lot of action, but also a lot of complexity.
Yeah, starting with electric vehicles, it's a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, you've got China, where EVs are already cheaper than gas-powered cars, in many cases, thanks to government subsidies.
Right. They're really leading the charge when it comes to EV adoption.
Yeah.
And that's driving down costs and spurring innovation globally.
But the article also points out that in other parts of the world, like here in the UK, EVs are still generally more expensive than their gas-powered counterparts, even though they are getting cheaper.
Yeah, affordability is still a barrier in many places. Even with government incentives and targets in place, it's a reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, so EVs are a work in progress. What about deforestation? The BBC article focuses specifically on the Amazon, which is obviously a critical area.
It is, and there's some good news there. The article mentions that deforestation in Brazil actually fell in 2023, thanks in part to renewed government efforts to protect the rainforest.
That's huge. The Amazon is so vital for regulating the global climate. It's like the lungs of the planet.
Exactly. It plays a crucial role as a carbon sink, absorbing massive amounts of CO2. So protecting the Amazon is essential for mitigating climate change.
But the article also points out that while deforestation decreased in Brazil, it actually increased in other parts of the Amazon basin. So it's not all good news.
Yeah, it highlights how complex and interconnected this issue is. Solutions require a mix of approaches, punishments for illegal deforestation, but also incentives for sustainable practices.
It's like trying to plug holes in a leaky boat. You fix one and another one pops up somewhere else.
That's a great analogy. And that brings us to a potentially even more sobering topic, the concept of climate tipping points. You brought an article from earth.org about this explainer, the tipping points of climate change.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a downer, but I think it's important to face the facts even if they're scary.
Absolutely. The article does a great job of explaining what climate tipping points are. These thresholds in the Earth system that once crossed can lead to irreversible changes. And what's really concerning is that we're getting dangerously close to some of these tipping points.
So, like, what are we talking about here? What are some of the specific tipping points that have scientists worried?
Well, the article highlights several. The Greenland ice sheet, for one. The thawing of permafrost is another big one. And then there's a potential disruption of ocean circulation patterns, specifically something called the AMOC.
Okay, those all sound bad. But what does it actually mean for us if these tipping points are crossed?
Well, the article goes into some detail about the potential consequences, and they're pretty dire. We're talking about things like rising sea levels that could inundate coastal cities, disrupted agriculture, leading to food shortages, and extreme weather events causing widespread damage.
It's a lot to take in. Honestly, it feels like we're teetering on the edge of a cliff.
It's definitely a sobering reality. And
Yeah.
the IPCC has warned that exceeding 1.5 C of warming could trigger some of these tipping points. It underscores the urgency of addressing climate change.
Okay, so we've got these looming tipping points, and global efforts to tackle climate change seem to be falling short. So what can we do? Is there any hope?
I wouldn't say there's no hope. We're not powerless in this situation. There are things we can do both individually and collectively. And, you brought some interesting information about one potential avenue for action businesses taking the lead on climate action. You specifically included the website of Ecologit.
Yeah, Ecolaundry really caught my eye. They're doing some innovative stuff. It's not just about empty promises or greenwashing. They're focusing on tangible, high-impact projects.
Right. What's interesting about Ecologi is their focus on high-integrity projects. They're supporting reforestation efforts, investing in carbon removal technologies, working on habitat restoration. These are actions that directly address climate change.
And they're not just about doing good for the planet. They're also demonstrating to businesses that climate action can actually be good for business.
Exactly. They highlight how taking climate action can drive revenue boost, brand image, engage employees, and attract new customers. There's actually making the case that saving the planet can be good for your bottom line.
That's a message that resonates especially in the business world. It's not just about altruism. It's about recognizing that sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand.
Precisely. And that's an important shift in thinking. But let's not forget about us as individuals. You've also included some notes on climate-focused investing. How can we align our personal financial decisions with our values and potentially contribute to solutions?
Yeah, that's a fascinating area, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. It feels like we've got a lot to unpack there.
We do. And it's a conversation that's becoming increasingly important. So let's shift gears and dive into the world of climate-focused investing. What are the options? What are the potential benefits? And what are the things we need to be aware of?
Okay, so let's talk about this whole climate-focused investing thing. Like, what are we actually talking about here?
Well, it's a pretty broad field, basically. It's about putting your money into companies and projects that are working towards climate solutions, or at least trying to reduce their environmental impact. You mentioned several key areas in your notes.
Yeah, I jotted down a bunch: renewable energy, green technology, electric vehicles, sustainable agriculture, green real estate, climate funds, and even carbon offsets. Seems like there's a lot to choose from.
There is, which is good.
Yeah.
It means there are opportunities across all sorts of sectors. But yeah, you got to remember each area comes with its own risks and potential returns.
Okay, so let's break it down a bit, starting with renewable energy. That seems like a pretty safe bet, right?
It's definitely got huge growth potential. I mean, as
Wow.
we move away from fossil fuels, the demand for solar, wind, geothermal is only going to go up.
Right, so potentially good returns, but are there any risks?
Well, government policies and regulations can have a big impact.
Yeah.
Any changes in subsidies or incentives can affect how profitable these companies are. And like with any new tech, there's always the risk of something even newer coming along and disrupting the market.
Makes sense. Okay, what about green technology? That feels like a really broad term. What does it actually include?
It is broad. It covers a whole range of innovations that aim to lessen environmental impact. So things like energy-efficient tech, waste management solutions, water purification systems, sustainable materials, even stuff like carbon capture and storage.
So high impact potentially, but maybe also higher risk.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Green tech is evolving fast, but not all companies are created equal. Got to do your research.
All right, let's move on to electric vehicles. We talked about them earlier, but from an investment standpoint, what's the outlook?
EVs are definitely hot right now. The shift to electric mobility is happening globally, and there are tons of companies trying to get in on it.
So lots of potential for growth, but also a lot of competition. How do you even pick winners in a crowded market like that?
It's tough. You got to look at things like the company's tech production capacity market share, but the overall trend towards EVs is undeniable.
Okay, what about sustainable agriculture? Food is essential, but is it a good area for climate-focused investing?
Absolutely.
Huh.
Sustainable ag is crucial for fighting climate change and making sure we can feed everyone. And there are lots of companies doing cool stuff.
Like what? Are we talking about investing in organic farms?
Could be, but it's broader than that. There are companies developing new ag tech,
Hmm.
like precision farming, vertical farming, even plant-based meat alternatives.
So it's not just about the farms themselves, it's about the whole system.
Exactly. Now, what about green real estate? Have you heard much about that?
Yeah, but I'm not really sure what it means.
Basically, it's buildings designed and operated in an eco-friendly way. Think energy efficiency, water conservation, sustainable materials, even renewable energy generation on site.
Like solar panels on roofs and stuff.
Yeah. And it's not just individual buildings, it's also about sustainable urban planning, making communities walkable and bikeable.
Okay, that makes sense. What about climate funds? I don't know much about those.
They're investment vehicles that specifically target climate-related projects and companies. They pool money from lots of investors and diversify it across a portfolio of climate investments.
So it's like a one-stop shop for climate investing.
Exactly. It's good for people who want to support climate solutions, but don't have the time or know how to pick individual investments.
All right, and lastly, there's carbon offsets.
Yeah.
Those have been kind of controversial, right?
Yeah, they have. They allow people or companies to invest in projects that reduce emissions to offset their own carbon footprint.
But I've heard some offset projects aren't very effective.
That's true. There's definitely debate about the legitimacy of some carbon offset programs. You got to do your research, make sure the projects you're supporting are actually making a difference.
So buyer beware, basically.
Exactly. Climate-focused investing is still evolving. It's
Yeah.
exciting, but you got to be informed and think critically.
So it seems like there's no one right way to do this. It depends on your goals, your risk tolerance, and how much impact you want to have.
That's a great summary. And remember, climate-focused investing isn't just about making money. It's about being part of the solution to the climate crisis. It's about using your investments to build a better future.
You know, it's amazing to see just how many different ways there are to get involved in climate action. We've talked about global summits, individual businesses, even personal investments. It really feels like everyone can play a part.
And it's that collective action that's going to be key.
Mhm.
You know, we started this whole deep dive with those scary tipping points, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all.
It really is.
Yeah.
Especially when you read about those fossil fuel companies still getting approval for new projects. Sometimes it feels like we're fighting a losing battle.
I get that. But then you see the incredible growth in renewable energy, the innovations in green technology businesses like Ecologiol stepping up, and so many people making conscious choices with their money. It gives me hope that we're moving in the right direction.
It's like this constant tug of war between the old ways and the new, and it's hard to tell who's going to win.
That's a perfect analogy, and it highlights how important this moment is. The decisions we make now are going to shape the future, whether we stick with the status quo or create something new.
So this might sound silly, but what can I as one person really do? I mean, I'm not a CEO or a billionaire investor. Does it really matter if I buy an electric car or recycle?
That's a great question, and one that a lot of people ask. The answer is absolutely yes. Your individual choices matter. Every decision you make, every purchase you make is like casting a vote.
So I'm voting with my wallet.
Exactly. And it's not just about what you buy. It's about the companies you support, the policies you advocate for, the conversations you have with your friends and family.
I never thought of it that way. It's actually pretty empowering. It means we all have a role to play in shaping the future.
Exactly. And that feeling of agency is so important. When people feel like their actions matter, that's when real change happens.
So what's the big takeaway here? What should our listeners keep in mind as they go about their day?
Don't underestimate the power of hope. Yes, the challenges are huge, but there's also this amazing movement of people and organizations working towards solutions.
And we've seen that throughout this deep dive, right?
Mhm.
From the progress in renewable energy to the businesses adopting sustainable practices to the individuals making conscious choices in their daily lives.
Exactly. And that hope isn't about ignoring the problems. It's about recognizing that we can still make a difference.
So that wraps up our deep dive into the world of climate change. We've covered a lot of ground, but the main takeaway is that we can all be part of the solution.
Remember, the future isn't set in stone. It's up to us to create the world we want to see.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep making a difference.